So Tieton is what I'm going to talk most about this evening, but I'm going to start with where I started. I moved to Seattle in 1978 from Los Angeles. I had been working in graphic design studios there and studied the photography of artwork at Los Angeles County Museum of Art. Decided that I'd had enough of Los Angeles and spending 3 hours a day in the car every day, and decided that Seattle felt much more like a city than Los Angeles did. So on the drive up, I decided, since I didn't have any opportunities waiting for me, that since I knew nothing about starting a graphic design and photography studio, that's what I would do. And that's what I did, and it's still pretty much that today. In the mid-'80s, we started doing work for museums. And today, we have a staff of 10. We have worked with publishing exhibition catalogs and collection books for over 200 museums around the country. We produce 40 to 50 high-end, really beautiful exhibition catalogs, collection books, souvenir books, and so on. That's the part of the business that I know very, very well. And I think we're the biggest company of our type in the country. So that's the mothership. That's the basis for the rest of what you're going to learn about. So what do? Well, we handle the design, a lot of the editorial work. We're kind of like a publishing company, but we don't distribute books, we don't market books. We do all the creative work. We help package the books, and then we connect museums to the trade publishers for the distribution of the titles. We do a lot of work with the Seattle Art Museum, San Diego Museum, the High. We've worked with lots of work with the Art Institute of Chicago, Denver Art Museum, you know, on and on and on and on. And it's very satisfying. We have an editorial team, we have a design team, production team, and we work with IO Color, a pre-press house in Pioneer Square that I was a founding partner of back in 2000 when we were making the shift from analog to digital color reproduction. We get to work with some of the most interesting projects and curators working in museums today. And the nice thing about being in this business is that I can kind of dip into a topic, we learn about it, and then we can jump out of it. We don't have to become true experts in it. And so museums are such interesting kind of incubators for scholarship, and they're dealing with the artists, and they're dealing with the art history, and what the art means, and the quality of the art, and connoisseurship. And it's not really a commercial enterprise. So you have people who are really passionate. We get to work with people who are really so into what they're doing that their enthusiasm for the topic just spills over into our staff. So we've been doing this for a very long time, have a nice big design board in the office. The office is behind Paper Hammer. So you go through Paper Hammer, and there's a door, you go through the door, and that's where this office is here, where the staff of 10 designers and editors and production people work. So as I was preparing for this talk, I was thinking about motivations. And at some point, I realized that the physical analog studio that I had built when I started the company had shrunk in size. We were no longer using T-squares and glue and wax and tape. We were working on screens. And we were sitting there in our nice offices, working on screens, imagining how physical things would look based on staring into computer screens. And there must have been something that made me think, you know, I'm really missing the tactile. And I no longer have a place. Did that just go black? Is this a problem, Larry? Oh. Okay. There we go. Well, and the fighting with technology is an issue as well. But there was just kind of this vague dissatisfaction that, you know, is this going to be my career? Is this it? I'm going to be staring at computer screens and doing wonderful work, working with wonderful people, making physical objects. But the idea that I would just be sitting there staring at a computer screen, I think triggered an interest in looking for something more. Now, my partner and I were traveling around eastern Washington outside of Yakima back in, what year was it? And Miller Hull designed the cabin. So it looks like a little gas station plunked on a hill, and it's wonderful. It's paradise. So we were spending more and more time at that cabin. It still doesn't have cell phone reception. You can occasionally get a text out from this location. It's off the grid, which is all fine for a couple of days, but being creatively ambitious, you get hungry for connecting with the world. So then we thought, well, maybe it would make sense for us. Maybe we could spend more time at the cabin if we found a little place in a town close by where we could create a studio and an office. So that was the idea. Well, one thing led to another, and it grew into Tieton, and we don't spend nearly as much time at the cabin as we want because Tieton has kind of overwhelmed us. Here's a map showing where Tieton is in relationship to Ellensburg and Yakima and Walla Walla. It's kind of halfway between Seattle and Walla Walla. It's a 2.5-hour drive. But the one thing that was responsible for everything that you're going to see after this are these little critters. These are goat head thorns, and they're diabolical. They grow in the concrete. They're very innocent looking when they're all nice and green. But one day in 2005, I was riding my bike down around the valley and saw the sign for Tieton, never been there before, rode up the hill on the bicycle, ran in through town, kind of thought, yeah, interesting, odd little town, and pulled into an abandoned parking lot and hit a bunch of goat head thorns. And in 10 feet, I had 18 punctures. So in both tires, so it took the rest of the afternoon in the middle of the park repairing the tires, and I was kind of, stuck there for several hours. And as I sat there fixing the tires, I noticed all these empty storefronts and warehouses. And I thought, God, in Seattle, these places would be $1 million or $500,000 or whatever. And here they just can't be that expensive. The countryside around there is really lovely. It's orchard land, apples, apricots, cherries. Some wine grapes are starting to show up. But it's very pastoral. In the winter, we can get snow. We had a lot of snow this winter. But the town itself is just a little tiny 4-block little town center around a beautiful little park. And there are about 1,200 people. It's about 70% Hispanic. And yes, you still see people riding horses through, usually on Sunday afternoons. And what is going on with this thing? It's just a very, very sleepy little town. Now, even though the agriculture around the area is doing phenomenally well, the core of the town kind of lost its reason for being when Walmart and Costco and so many of those places moved into Yakima, because Yakima is only 15 minutes away. So the whole idea of retail making any sense in Tieton just didn't happen. So these spaces were built for either fruit warehousing or for the retail of the town at the time. And so that's why all these storefronts were empty. There's a Mexican bakery that does very well. There's a little cafe that does pretty well. There's a little post office. But there aren't many businesses that make retail sense anymore. The spaces, though, are still very attractive. When I got there, the town was just kind of decaying. The building that you see on the left, the concrete block building, had been empty for 12 years. It was a fruit transit warehouse. The big warehouse that we ended up buying had been unused for about probably 10 years. The agricultural businesses have expanded to the perimeter of town because they need much, much, much more space, and it needs to be high-tech space. So that leaves these warehouses and these transit warehouses in the middle of town just completely empty. So the summer of 2000, this is the transit warehouse. This building, from the outside, doesn't look like much, but that's the inside. And you can see how attractive it was. And Mike and I just kind of wandered around and just thought, oh my God, you know, this is amazing. So 2005, we invited all these creative friends from Seattle, and we'd sit in the park and we'd kind of play Monopoly and imagine what these spaces could be if we bought this storefront and that warehouse. What could make sense to support the businesses that we have here over there? So the idea, by the end of the summer of 2005, was to buy some of these properties and start or expand our creative businesses over there, hiring people from the community, training them to do what needs to be done, and having this kind of hands across the Cascades arrangement. So here we are, 12 years later, and much of what you're going to see, all of what you're going to see from now on, is what has happened there. I'm responsible for a lot of it, but a whole group of people are responsible for other aspects. So this building is now the Tieton Lofts. So the building had not been occupied in 12 years. We bought it, we converted it into 14 live-work condominiums. We sold, we developed them in 2007. We sold them in 2008, mostly to the people who were involved in that original idea brainstorming. And for the most part, those same people are still there. We finished, we sold all the units, everything was fine, and then that thing called the recession happened. And that really kind of slowed us down. Fortunately, all of this was done when the recession started, but some of the ideas that had started to get some momentum, a distillery, for example, just kind of sputtered out because the people who wanted to do that had to retreat back to Seattle to rescue their businesses here. We all remember those days, and we have no interest in repeating them. But this building is kind of the heart of that group. Really beautiful spaces. This is a common gallery space where we have potluck parties. This is the loft that we have. Philip Christophides was the architect, and he did an amazing job. And then over the time since 2008, the enterprises that I've started include making handmade art books, which is an extension of Lucia Marquand, the art book publishing company here, Paperhammer Merchandise, Mighty Tieton Production, Paperhammer Fulfillment, Marquand Editions, and Tieton Mosaic. Now, the other day, we decided to take a group photograph of the people who work in these businesses. So we've created a fair number of jobs. The only one not from the area is me, the guy standing in the center. And the talent that we've been able to tap into there is amazing. There's something about this time right now when people who live in rural areas are no longer as isolated as they would have been before the internet. And there is a hunger for wanting to tap into a creative community. And so the level of sophistication and skill, I think, is much higher today than it would have been 20 years ago. So it's not hard to find people who are really smart and careful and want to be engaged in a creative business, but because of the economy of Yakima, those sorts of businesses just don't exist there. So to be able to connect the creative ambitions from the west side with the resources, the underused and underappreciated resources from the east side, and blend those things together has allowed all kinds of exciting things to happen in my little world and in others as well. So these are two buildings. We're fixing up the one on the right now. It's going to be ready for an open house April 22nd in Tieton. And then the building on the left used to be the pharmacy. It used to be the soda fountain. And now it's my bindery and my studio. So when I'm there in Tieton, and I jump back and forth, I'm kind of in Tieton half of the time and in Seattle half the time. This is where I work. We do a lot of work by hand. Most of the work is done by hand. But we also have technology. We use laser cutters, we use plotter cutters, digital printing, we certainly use computers, but we have a wonderful letterpress studio and lots of other studios for doing things analog. So this whole idea that I was going to be spending the rest of my life staring at a computer screen, no, I'm running around frantic, trying to keep track of everything that's going on, and much of it is very, very much analog. Edward is here. He's very, very good designer and grew up in Yakima, lived in Italy for a long time, came back to Yakima recently, and just kind of, in my eyes, fell out of the sky and landed at our front door. And he's doing some really spectacular work that you'll see in some of the future slides. When we set up the book art studio, we bought a bunch of equipment. The cutter here, the guillotine cutter, or not the guillotine, the board shear here is about 100 years old. It's huge. It's in really good shape. We bought it refurbished. And it's probably the piece of equipment we use more often than any other. This is a Smythe stitcher. It was made in the 1920s. We're still able to buy parts for it. And it really speeds up the stitching of the signatures. So instead of doing ones and twos of these books, we can do 50, we can do 100, we can do 150. And that's the level that the production needs to be at in order to make business sense. We have a very nice Vandercook. Steve Morgan is our letterpress printer over there. And he was trained by a guy who had been doing it since he was 16. He retired in his mid-70s. He kind of taught Steve how to run these machines. And Steve is such a natural that he picked it up in weeks instead of years. And the studio, since he's taken over it, has never looked cleaner, better organized, and more productive. Again, really nice Vandercook. We've got two Chandler and Price's and Heidelberg. Maria, the woman in the center, is the manager of the bindery. When she showed up in 2008, she had never bound a book before. The woman who was setting up the bindery gave her a skills test, called me up and said, this woman was meant to do this. In half an hour after Maria walked in, woman was on the phone saying, you have got to hire this woman. She is just a magician. And sure enough, she is. So she has turned into an extraordinarily fine binder and is also very good at training other people and picking out the talent. I couldn't bind a book to save my life. Glue and paper and cloth and all that stuff, it just ends up looking like the dog's breakfast. I can design for it, but I can't actually do the work. Maria, though, can take my messy little prototypes and turn them into really beautiful things. And again, it's this kind of crazy talent that's in the area. It's just looking for a little bit of mentorship and an opportunity to work in a creative field. And she's the most photogenic person I know. So Maria, and Maria's son took all these photographs. So Reese showed up too. Reese actually has a BFA from the University of Washington in industrial design. Well, we need binders. Our bindery is busy all the time. So Maria is now in the process of teaching Reese how to do, and Serena, Steve's daughter, the third one you saw in the previous picture, how to do this kind of work. Well, this is the kind of work we're producing there. This is an edition of 35. It's a portfolio that we're doing for somebody here, a publisher here in Seattle. And we worked on the design. All the pages are letterpress printed. This is a volume about Australian photographers who use 19th century photo processing techniques, but contemporary imagery. So this is a book honoring those. Each of the 15 photographers sent 15 prints to the publisher. No, actually sent 35 prints, and then each of the photographers gets one of these portfolios, and they get a copy of everybody else's photograph. Craig, the publisher, just got back from Australia, and these are going to be shown in Australian museums and so on and so forth. But really beautifully produced, wonderful, wonderful editions. This is a piece by a Colombian artist named Mateo Lopez, and in this, there's a book in the aqua-colored little slipcase, and then there's a paper sculpture that gets pinned to the inside of this box. We did 30 of these, and then we did 150 of these, which house the book in a cruciform binding. So the book itself we printed here in Seattle digitally. It's got French folds, stab-stitched, screen-printed cover, and then this cruciform folding cover. Now, our bindery is just kind of bursting at the seams. We have so many projects, and many of these projects come from my art museum and art world clients that are usually interested in offset books, but occasionally these projects come along where they really want something special and maybe they only need 20 copies, 50 copies, 100 copies. That's the market that we've really developed, and it's creatively, for me, as the designer for these things, it's really thrilling. I'm not just designing something I've been designing for 30 years. I'm making up something new every day, and I have the team, and I have the tools, and it really makes sense. So the market is urban. The kind of the reason for doing it is urban. But I could never do this work here in Seattle. I have to have the team over there. I have to have the space there. So that's kind of the model that I'm replicating in many other ways. Merchandise for Paper Hammer, This is by far the most elaborate edition that we've done. It's called The Magician. There are 12 volumes that slip into this magician's case. It's a graphic novel told in 12 volumes. Each volume has a different printing technique and a different binding technique. It's crazy ambitious. It took us 2 years to finally get this thing done. And I think Maria could not have been happier the day the last element was finished, because it was a bear. And of course, the artist we were working with didn't want to use any of the materials the way they were meant to be used, so we had to make up techniques all the time. We had a little exhibition of it in Paper Hammer a couple of years ago, and copies of this are now at the Met, the Library of Congress, the Art Institute of Chicago, School of Visual Concept, no, the one in New York, Art Center, Art Institute of Chicago, yeah. Anyway, in really some of the finest libraries in the country. Again, this just could not have been possible. It would not have been possible to make this in Seattle. We did an edition of 25. Yeah. So this one is one we're working on right now. Edward is primarily the designer. He and I worked on this together. And this is the book in the case. And the book itself is this. It's a kind of a pop-up of this tree. The client in this case was the photographer who took these photographs of a single tree in a small town in Costa Rica that's called a relic tree. It's the last survivor of what used to be a forest of these trees. Environmental scientist, Gretchen Daly, who teaches at Stanford, has spent 20 years in this area in Costa Rica studying the forests there, and she is particularly interested in this tree. It's La Ceiba tree is a kapok tree, but it's as important to the village as she thinks our planet should be to us. So through this tree, the lesson is that we need to be thinking about the planet in the same way that this village clings to this tree, with the same sort of respect and kind of a sense of honor. The first copy of this went to the Vatican Library 2 weeks ago. And we've sold a couple since then to libraries and to individuals. This is an edition of 28. The books are letterpress printed. The photographer is digitally printed these on Japanese washi paper. And Edward came up with the design and the whole concept of this pop-up. The one that I'm just about to start in on here is this bento box for a textile designer in Tokyo. Reiko Sudo is her name. She's been around for 30 years in the textile world, and she's world famous in that world. Each of these trays, instead of having photographs of her work, will actually have the textiles themselves. So this is a 30-year career essentially distilled down into this bento box. The first level has 2 books. One is a biography. The other describes the contents of the boxes. The next one down has these collages that she's created using the actual textiles. So the clients that have bought these so far are either textile collectors or museums or special collection libraries with connection to industrial design, textile design, fashion design. And to have a 30-year career distilled down to this with the actual fabrics has enormous educational value. So we're not going to have any trouble selling 50 of these. I'm really honored to be able to work with somebody like her. Now, when she and I met about this, the original idea was to do a conventional book, and about 15 minutes into the conversation, she says, I have all these remnants from 30 years of work. Why don't we use that? Why don't we use these remnants? Because I'm never going to use them in any other way. So that became the content. The thing I like about our studio is that instead of a book artist who is thinking, okay, I want to create content, I need to imagine content, I need to tell a story, I need to tell a poem, I need to do illustrations, whatever, having a studio where I can pull in from the most creative people working today, use their content, and work with them to figure out the best way to create and to publish this work is, again, hugely creatively exciting for me. The next tray down has this book. We're using all of her fabrics for the binding materials for the trays, and then the insides of the books have actual swatches and then information about each of the fabrics. She does a lot of work with Japanese industry. She uses Japanese waste products from the car industry and figures out how to blend them into textiles that are really just sumptuous and gorgeous. Lots of folding, really interesting stuff. And the last tray has 2 levels that have the tools and the raw materials she uses to create the fabrics. If any of you are in New York in the next month or 2, she has a show up right now at the Cooper Hewitt. It's a wonderful show that kind of talks about how she's helping to save some of the silk industry, the Japanese silk industry, by finding ways to use the waste products that the silk industry produces into creating more really beautiful textiles that can be used for contemporary purposes. So we started Paperhammer when we moved into a space. The space that we're in had all this office space behind the retail shop, but it came with the retail shop. And I thought, okay, well, I don't know anything about retail, but why don't we make products in Tieton and then sell them downtown Seattle? So when you walk into Paperhammer, about half the merchandise that you see there is merchandise that we make in Tieton. We buy in other merchandise, so it's not exclusively Paperhammer by any means, but much of it is. Now, some of the products that we're making there, we're now wholesaling nationally. So we have reps around the country, and we're on Etsy wholesale, and we're keeping that end of the business going as well. So that's, anyway, there you go. I've never been one to shy away from starting something I don't know anything about. Another part of the business that we do, you may be familiar with the Seattle design and architecture firm Gray Pants. Gray Pants produces these lights. They design and produce these lights. Their first lights were out of corrugated cardboard. This is white cardboard that's no longer laser cut, it's razor cut. And they couldn't keep up with the production in Soho. And the best use of their time was to come up with new products, new architecture projects, and to do prototyping and custom orders in the studio there. So they've contracted with us to produce all of their scrap lights and now some of their white scrap light lampshades. This was an order, these rows were an order we did for a bar restaurant that opened in New Jersey 2 years ago, and we produced, I think, 125 of these puppies, and they look great. They really makes the whole place. So we have a laser cutter studio, and we bring in a couple of people who have just really made this a nice little business in Tieton. Gray Pants sends us the computer files that inform the laser cutter. They send us the purchase orders. We cut the material, we glue it together, we take the electrical components, and then drop ship it from our warehouse. When you have a 40,000 square foot warehouse, you have to find things to do with it. And so we ended up storing books and creating a fulfillment service for small publishers. The biggest of our small publishers is Tim Burton. Tim Burton has an interesting publishing model. He doesn't wholesale his books, he retails his books directly. He makes a lot more money if he just sells directly to the customer rather than going through Amazon or going through retail bookstores. And when you have 4 million Facebook followers, it's possible to sell directly and very profitably. So we have just pallet loads of his various titles. We created a website for him. His customers come to our website, they buy the book, we pull the books out, we wrap it up, and we ship it off, and about 1/3 of the boxes go to international destinations, and 2/3 end up going to domestic ones. It works for him, it works for us, and it's really a nice, steady business. And all he has to do to sell a bunch of books is on Facebook say, buy my book, and the next day we come in and there are all these orders waiting for us. Nice thing about this is that we ship them all out of the Tieton post office. So the Tieton post office is crazy successful compared to most small-town rural post offices. And they do a great job, the prices can't be beat, and it's a win-win all the way around. Juliana handles our fulfillment for the wholesale and for the Tim Burton books, and we have a couple of other clients who are starting to have us do different kinds of fulfillment. Now, one day the Arts Commission, the Washington State Arts Commission came to us and says, you know, we really like this model of art, local, small town, and enterprise. Do you have a business that maybe a National Endowment for the Arts grant could help you start? And so we sat around for a few minutes, and a woman who was running Tieton Arts and Humanities at the time said, well, remember that mosaic idea that you've always talked about? Why don't we do that? And I said, okay, let's do that. So we started Tieton Mosaic. And this company was inspired by the New York subway station mosaics. And I poked around and discovered there is not a company in the country doing that kind of mosaic anymore. There are lots of mosaic artists, but the artists want to be thought of as painters, as artists, as sculptors. They don't want to be seen as craftspeople. And the mosaic, the ones who want to do the stained glass sorts of things, have no experience with typography at all. So combining from the design resources we have here with that technique, we started Tieton Mosaic. Steve not only runs the Letterpress studio, but he also runs the Mosaic studio. And Steve used to do brush lettering. That was his training. So when he showed up one day after he read an article about how we had gotten the National Endowment grant, he said, you know, I think I would be really good at this. And I said, well, why? And he says, well, I used to do hand lettering. And so we tested him and came up with, we tried a few things on and had mosaic artists train us on the technique of making the mosaics. And Steve and I were playing around with fruit label graphics from the area. So a lot of the typography is informed by the apple crate label typography from the 40s and 30s, 40s, and 50s, which is so old that it's cool again. And it just really looks so good in glass mosaic. So this was Steve's 4th mosaic. So he was born to do this kind of work. This is the studio that we created. And in order to teach ourselves how to do this work, since we had this grant, we'd better learn learn this technique. And since there is no one else in the country doing this sort of work, we had to train ourselves. So we set off and decided to do all of these letters in various colorways, different techniques, different glass materials. And by the time we finished all the letters, all the numbers, all the punctuation, we pretty much had a good idea of how this technique works. And then we started getting a little fancier, a little more ambitious. The NEA grant that we got was to create mosaic signage around Tieton, which we've done, and then the company would continue as a commercial company afterwards. So we're now starting to market our services nationally to design firms, architecture firms, interior design firms, and we're open for business and looking for this sort of work. Now, just today, the reason that Edward and Steve are in town is because we created a large mosaic for the front of Paperhammer to replace the painted paper sign that's been, that I've had to patch together for the last couple of years to keep it in place. And so today, they brought the 6 panels from Tieton and finished putting the last little filler tiles in about half an hour before this talk started. So if you go to Paperhammer tomorrow, this really big, beautiful 9 by 9 foot mosaic of the Paperhammer logo will be greeting you. The signs we created for the town of Tieton are this style. Very simple, very easy, very nice and clean and fresh. And this technique I just am so in love with. You know, this 3-dimensional quality, but it's all flat glass. It's really simple on one hand, but then very sophisticated, and it's kind of for the ages. It has just enormous potential, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how this grows. So there was a story you may have heard about. We launched a Kickstarter campaign with the idea that we would do a facade for the Tieton post office in mosaic. And we successfully raised $52,000. But the day we had crossed the threshold, I get a call from the number 3 guy at the post office in Washington, D.C. saying, it's not going to happen. The local post office people were happy. They thought, this is great, you know, it's going to put us on the map. Isn't this terrific? They were treating this as a maintenance issue. The number 3 guy in DC said, no, this is a management nightmare. The 33,000 post offices around the country are going to inundate us wanting to do this sort of thing, and they're never going to do it at the level of quality you guys have proposed. I'm shutting you down. So we had to cancel the Kickstarter and, you know, so on. It did buy us a lot of local goodwill, and we have very good relations with the community, but the fact that we were really doing this for a public building and then raising the money on our own and got shut down made us look like good guys in the eyes of most of the people in the community. So those are kind of the enterprises I've started, but because of what we're doing, we've attracted lots of other people who have started little enterprises that I really don't have any or much to do with. The first one, Tieton Farm and Creamery, 2 women from Seattle, Ruth and Lori Babcock, always wanted to start a creamery. They started a creamery, and they're doing very, very well. I don't know of 2 harder working people on the planet. It's nothing but work. Right now, the goats are just springing out babies like crazy, and the lambs are popping out, and they're all, you know, gambling around, and it's they're raising money for a new barn, and they're milking, and they're making cheese, and they're selling cheese, and you know, it's pretty much nonstop, but they're doing really remarkably well. They sell at Beecher's. We just dropped off a big shipment today, and University Market, and then they sell at the Yakima Market as well. Tieton Cider Works started. The Campbells are local orchardists, but they also live here in Seattle. They always wanted to start a cidery. Same year that we started Mighty Tieton, they said, well, maybe this is when we should start the cidery. So when they started, 2008, they bottled 200 cases of cider. Last year, they were the 8th largest winery by volume in Washington State. So just explosive growth. They planted the fruit trees. These are not, you can't use dessert apples for cider. They have to be cider apples. So they had the orchards. They're all organic. They put in the orchards, and now it's just a matter of keeping up with production and expanding. I think they're in 18 states now, and they're just going like crazy. So they're kind of our poster child for a more conventional big growth business. Mighty Tieton Construction, an old friend from college, Kerry Quint, started Mighty Tieton Construction. He designs a lot of the furniture that you see around town, does some of the build-outs, and then takes on commercial projects, furniture, mostly furniture design. He doesn't really do buildings. But in the warehouse, we have the metal shop and wood shop, so great place to work. To get people to come to Tieton, we started Mighty Tieton Events. We rent portions of the warehouse for weddings and routine annual events like the Christmas Bazaar, Day of the Dead, open house. We have an art show, annual art show, and my favorite is Cyclekarts. So Cyclekarts, a group in Seattle, Dan Stetler and Doug Verret from Resolute Lighting started the Cyclekart Club. They're all handmade racers. Tieton is the only city that's ever given them permission to race on city streets. So Tieton is kind of branding itself as Cyclekart Town. So the last weekend in June, last Saturday in June, this will be the 4th year, they have cyclekart races, and it's just the best. It's a hoot. But all of these vehicles are handmade. They all have a Honda pressure washer motor. They all share that, and the same wheels, but everything else is handmade. And then on Sunday, they go out to the orchards and they race around there. But it's a blast. The official hat is the all-weather fez, and there's a statuette that you don't want to win. It's for the guy who was the most competitive, the least safe, and the biggest jerk. So humor is a large part of their ethos. Last year, the guy who would have won that statuette was the police chief of Tieton, and we couldn't give it to him because if we did, he never would have given us permission to come back. But he was a great, really nice guy, but he got a little too excited behind the wheel of the Cyclekarts and just did things a little risky. Holiday Craft Bazaar has turned into the region's best craft bazaar. Started very modestly, and every year it just keeps growing and growing and growing. Tieton Arts and Humanities is the nonprofit component of Mighty Tieton, and it started with a poetry festival, LITFUSE, but it's evolved into having concerts. It supports the Day of the Dead, the 10x10 art exhibit, an Art in the Park program, and then special workshops throughout the year. We have art installations and performances. I don't want to make this look like Disneyland where every night all this stuff is happening, but several times throughout the year, these things go on. And I think if we've added anything to the community, it's a sense of hope that this town, when we got there, felt like it was just kind of falling apart. It didn't really have any reason for being anymore. And now it does. You know, it's cool. It's kind of unusual. It's cool. And nobody could figure out, why do these Seattleites want to come to Tieton, for God's sakes? And, you know, well, it's beautiful, but also there's the opportunity to do things that we can only dream about doing here. You know, how would you do something like this in Seattle or Bellevue or any of the surrounding areas? We had the Portland Cello Project come twice to perform, and they spent time with the music classes in the local schools during the rehearsals. And the daughter of the chief of police in Tieton, his daughter was, I think, in the 6th grade or something, and she just started studying the cello. So she came to this thing, and suddenly her dad was the coolest guy in the whole world because he introduced her to the Portland Cello Project. So in lots of little ways, it makes a little difference in people's lives, and it just gives people a sense that there's a lot more going on in the world than what they might imagine. 10 by 10, we have nationally known poets come in September every year. This will be the 11th year. This is the 11th year we're doing it. And it's a workshop for people who are interested in poetry at any level. They're not, by any means, all professional poets. The faculty is first rate, but anybody who has any interest either in just poetry appreciation or actually writing is more than welcome to attend, and the tuition is ridiculously cheap. 10 by 10, this is now the 8th year. We started an exhibit in the warehouse. It's juried by nationally famous artists or curators. The only restriction is that no piece can be larger than 10 inches square. Can be any medium, any subject from anywhere in the world, but no dimension bigger than 10 by 10 by 10. And last year we had just about 1,000 entries, and it was juried down to about 150. The call for entries has gone out this year, and we expect that it'll be, you know, about the same size. The size restriction was important because we wanted people to be able to afford to ship their work from anywhere. And in this big, huge warehouse, having many, many, many works of art, small, was really made way more sense than great big artwork. Part of the open house we'll have on the 22nd of April is a local student art show, so that the kids from the high schools in the area have a venue to show their work. And that really helps bring the parents in, and parents who are proud of their children will go to the ends of the earth to express that pride. Another event that keeps growing every year is Dia de los Muertos. As you can imagine, in a town of 70% Latinos, this is a big event, and we have Florencio Lazo, an artist from Seattle, come and do the sand paintings that you see in the upper left. He comes every year. He does one at the Seattle Art Museum and the Tacoma Art Museum. And then the face painting is really popular, but we have La Katrina telling the stories. People from the community can come in and set up altars to celebrate their relatives and people who have passed. We set up this ridiculous altar a couple of years ago. A theater arts grad from Whitman College, kind of on steroids, went a little nuts with the laser cutter and the scrap that we had from the Gray Pants stuff. This is the sand painting from 2 years ago. Then Trimpin, the artist, sound artist Trimpin, has a sound space there. And Trimpin does sculpture that makes music all over the world. He parks his wonderful, amazing, ridiculous contraptions in this space, and there he can compose and he can tinker with them, and he can swap them in. One will go to a museum show, and another one will be coming back from a museum show. And he keeps insisting that he wants to retire in Tieton so he can just play with his toys endlessly. I don't know that he'll ever retire, but we hope that he does, because these bring great joy. So looking to the future, what does Tieton need? Well, I'm not going to start any more enterprises, I can tell you that. But we are going to welcome people who have ideas that might make sense there. So we're always on the lookout for people kind of like us who just say, well, okay, my life is going along here, but I've always wanted to do this, and I have the business sense, I have the wherewithal to actually maybe make this happen. And what's important to us is that we want enterprises that are going to provide jobs for the locals, because that's key to reviving the economy. And that the people who are involved are sensitive to the community and want to work with the community. We don't want just a widget manufacturer. We want a business that nobody else is doing anywhere else. And those kinds of creative businesses help brand Tieton as a place that's truly distinctive. It's not just a factory town. So that's what Tieton needs. Now, Tieton is also a place where Tieton is a city. So when you want to do something unusual, you go to the city, you say, this is what I want to do, and the mayor and the city council says, well, gosh, this is what you need to do to prove to us that this makes sense. And we do. And then they say, great, works for us. And if they need to go to the county to get approval for building permits and that sort of thing, the mayor is our advocate. We're not going down to Yakima County Hall, pounding on the table trying to get their attention. It's the mayor of the town going as our advocate. That's how we got the loft building built. That's how we ended up getting all kinds of things approved. One project right now is being done by Dan Stetler, who is a local architect, Seattle architect, also teaches, he's an adjunct at the U. And he bought these two Butler buildings from the city that were decaying and transported them to a lot he bought that's about 2 blocks from where the lofts are. And he's building a home and a studio for himself and his wife. And there will be a bridge connecting these two, and a living room, a sleeping area in one, and then a bedroom, kitchen, bath in the other. They haven't punched the windows in yet, but that's next. But who hasn't seen a Butler building and fantasized about doing something like that? Well, in Tieton, you can actually do it. And he got the approval. The engineering was approved. They got the building permit. The county agreed that this was all right. So good for him. And then what does Tieton offer? Well, rural affordability, real estate, and there's a few buildings that that are still waiting for somebody to turn into something, including a church. So if you want to come and get a place right on Town Square, it's got a bank. It used to be the movie theater in town. It used to be movie theater back in the 50s. And so it was turned into a Pentecostal church. That kind of fell away, and now the building's for sale. And I would love for somebody to buy it and figure out what to do with it. It's a 6,000 square foot building, and it's $178,000. And it's a good building. So we've built a platform. There's a community, there's a creative community there. As real estate prices become more and more expensive, you find people moving there because they can rent their homes in Seattle and live in Tieton for practically nothing, or they sell their place in Seattle and they have more money than they know what to do with in Tieton. You also see a number of people who are telecommuting. There's one guy who lives in the lofts who works for Microsoft, and he spends about 80% of his time in Tieton and 20% of his time back in Seattle. Functional city government. production, storage, fulfillment, quick access. Yakima's 15 minutes away. Yakima County is a county of 250,000 people. So it's not like you're off in the Okanagan or something with not very many resources. There are plenty of resources, interstates, and you know, get in and out. It's 2.5 hours from Seattle. I started the talk by saying that I was tired of spending 3 hours a day in the car in Los Angeles every single day, which I was, and every time I go down there to call on clients, I still spend 3 hours a day in the car. So 2.5 hours from Seattle once a week, a couple of times a month, that's a pretty good trade-off. So mightytieton.com is the website. My information is on the cards I handed out. And where else can you run around in the snow on cyclekarts? So there you go. We've got about 15 minutes left for questions. Who wants to know something?